Good morning, everyone. I'm Bobby Dutta. I'm the co-chair of SDAC. Please know that this event is being recorded for later broadcast on YouTube. Before I proceed with the presentation, we have a couple of housekeeping rules. Please mute your microphone if you're not speaking or asking a question. Please mute it if you have two microphones or more than one supply. If you hear any background noise or any kind of echo, you're likely the one who's causing the echo, so keep your mic muted at all times. If you have a question to ask, please unmute and ask the question, or you can simply put it in the chat box that we have here, and we will alternate answering the questions as they come between the chat and the live audio. Again, please know that this event is being recorded and later it's going to be available on YouTube. And again, thank you very much for attending SDAC. We'll get started right now. Our first guest speaker who was scheduled to be on, unfortunately, came down with a sudden illness, Susan Ambrose with SPB, and unable to attend. She sends her regrets. However, we have another wonderful keynote speaker instead of Susan Ambrose, and that speaker is Lori Gillihan. For 30 years, Ms. Gillihan has been served in the policy of program support supervisory management role for state of California. She had previously served as the Chief of Policy Division, Chief of Administrative and Special Officer. Ms. Gillihan was the SPB's executive representative to the implementation team for Governor's Reorganization Plan #1 that created CalHR. That's quite an accomplishment. Ms. Gillihan has also worked for the Department of Youth Authority and the Department of Correction and Rehabilitation. Ms. Gillihan earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology from California State University, Sacramento. So without further ado, I give you Ms. Gillihan. Ms. Gillihan, it's all yours.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk about first workforce data. Then I'm going to talk about some new legislation that affects persons with disabilities. I'm going to talk about our audit findings in the EEO area. And then I'm going to briefly touch on the health questionnaire and the typing tests that Susie updated SDAC on in her previous speech. So starting off with workforce data, we've determined that the threshold for statewide disability parity in California should be 16.6%. Currently, the state civil service is at 9.3%. That's actually a decrease of 0.8% from last year when we had 10.1%. So we're not going in the right direction. Currently, agencies that do not achieve at least 80% of the parity threshold of that's 13.3%, are required to submit an action plan to increase representation of persons with disabilities in the workforce. The most recent report showed that out of the 113 agencies with 30 or more employees, 15 agencies met or exceeded the 16.6 parity. 22 agencies were between 16.6 and 13.3, and 76 agencies fell below the 13.3% and were required to provide a goal and action plan. The five agencies with the highest percentage of employees with disabilities are the Department of Rehabilitation with 27.1%, the State Council on Developmental Disabilities with 24.6%, Children's and Families First Commission with 23.5%, State Compensation Insurance Fund with 22.7%, and the State Personnel Board with 20.3%. And I'm sure Susie's very pleased with that number. So I'm going to move on to recent legislative changes. AB 1604, which was signed into law on September 30th, 2022 by Governor Newsom, will enact civil service reforms with the intent of promoting upward mobility in state service employment. This bill requires that civil service examination announcements must include the minimum qualifications and functional core competencies for the classification. This bill proposes that upward mobility goals should include race, gender, LGBT, and disability status factors. This bill went into effect January 1st, 2023. By July 1 of each year, the state agencies must submit a report to CalHR demonstrating the department's progress toward meeting its upward mobility goals. Next, 1195, which was signed into law on September 30th, 2022, by Governor Newsom, is intended to facilitate the hiring of persons with disabilities within state agencies through the limited examination and appointment program known as LEAP. Existing law requires CalHR to provide a single certified list of eligible candidates if more than one employment list or a LEAP referral list exists. We call it the hiring managers list, where the LEAP candidates are combined with the non-LEAP list candidates, and it's not disclosed who's LEAP and who's not LEAP. But this bill, as an alternative to that, makes sure that departments know that they can order a LEAP-only list to increase their parity. So they can order the LEAP-only list, screen for only LEAP candidates, and interview only LEAP candidates in order to increase their parity. Let's see. We will be releasing, the State Personnel Board will be releasing a memo reminding state agencies of the importance and value of hiring persons with disabilities, especially considering the workforce is below parity. The memo will encourage state agencies to make use of the LEAP-only candidate list when making hires. The board will also be updating with CalHR to release an updated policy regarding LEAP lists. And this law went into effect January 1st, 2023. Next, AB 2229, which was signed into law on September 30th, 2022 by Governor Newsom, modifies the minimum standards for peace officers to require an individual to be free from bias against race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, religion, disability, or sexual orientation that would adversely affect the exercise of peace officers in this bill. Exercise peace officers' power, sorry. This bill requires pre-employment psychological screening of peace officer candidates to include screening for implicit bias against specified minority groups and persons with disabilities. This bill went into effect on September 30th, 2022. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about our compliance reviews. The SPB compliance review audits state agencies' EEO programs on a 3-year cycle. It doesn't mean they get audited every 3 years. It means sometime during the 3-year cycle, each department gets audited. Government Code 19790 requires all state agencies to have an effective EEO program that contains certain components. Our audits identify deficiencies in those components and require departments to submit an action plan for addressing those deficiencies. Specifically, we will look at whether the program includes a policy statement committed to equal opportunity, procedures for filing, processing, and resolving discrimination complaints, including appealing agency's decision, procedures for providing equal upward mobility and promotional opportunities for employees, and cooperating with CalHR and SPB and providing access to the records so that we can perform these audits. We also look at whether the department's EEO officer is at the managerial level, reports directly to and under the supervision of the director, is responsible for developing and implementing, coordinating, and monitoring the department's EEO program. If the EEO officer monitors the composition of oral panels in departmental examinations. An agency with less than 500 employees may have their personnel officer also serve as their EEO officer. Our compliance reviews check to make sure every EEO program meets all of these requirements. Out of the 302 reviews conducted since January 15th, 201 reviews, 67% were found departments were in compliance with all reviewed EEO requirements. Of those departments not completely in compliance, we found the deficiencies in the following areas. The EEO officer did not report directly to the head of the agency. This was in 4% out of 302 reviews. Another deficiency, EEO officer did not monitor the composition of oral panels, 3% of the 302 reviews. The department did not have an upward mobility plan, 2% of the 302 reviews. The department did not have an EEO program or dedicated EEO policy. Less than 1% of the 302 reviews were out of compliance. The EEO officer did not have a duty statement on file, which reflected EEO activities, or the EEO officer was not at the managerial level, or the personnel officer was inappropriately acting as EEO officer, 5% of the 302 reviews out of compliance. 75% of departments reviewed in 2021-22 had EEO programs that were in compliance with applicable law and rules. Well, we've seen improvements in recent years. For instance, all departments in 21-22 had the EEO officer monitoring the composition of oral panels, and they all had an upward mobility plan, and the EEO officer reported directly to the head of the agency, and all EEO officers had duty statements which reflected EEO duties. There weren't dramatic improvements in this last cycle of audit, and it's primarily because we added many tiny departments that we had never audited before. So they weren't aware of all of the requirements. So they are now, so we are expecting better numbers in the next go around. Also, I'm going to talk now about disability advisory committees. Every state agency is supposed to have a disability advisory committee comprised of individuals who have a disability or have an interest in disability issues. The DAC must advise the head of the agency on issues of concern to the employees with disabilities. The EEO officer provides leadership and guidance to the DAC and is responsible for ensuring the agency establishes and maintains a DAC. Of the 301 reviews we've conducted since 2015, 51% of agencies were found to be out of compliance with this area. Agencies out of compliance with this area are required to provide a corrective action plan to achieve compliance, and FPB staff provide technical assistance on how departments can meet this requirement. Most common reasons departments have for not being in compliance is a small size of the agency or lack of interest with employees. Departments that do not have are not large enough to have their own DAC or don't have enough members to form their own DAC, they combine with other agencies to form multi-agency DACs, as long as the requirement in the government codes are met relative to inform the agency head of concerns impacting employees with disabilities. We've worked with these departments to get together with other agencies and to form multi-agency DACs. For example, the Native American Heritage Commission reported having difficulties finding a DAC to join. Therefore, the Heritage Commission was invited to join the SPB, CalHR, and GovOps DAC. Multi-agency DACs are usually facilitated by EEO officer and each department. Each agency invites all employees to join the DAC so that there is at least one employee from each agency. The DAC then reports to each agency head on concerns impacting employees with disabilities. There is no prescribed manner in which the DAC provides recommendations to the agency head, but best practices include the EEO officer meeting regularly with state head to agency head to convey DAC recommendations, and submitting DAC recommendations by email, memo, or meeting minutes to the agency head. The DAC chairperson meeting with the agency head on a regular basis, monthly, quarterly. Multi-agency DACs, it could be employees representative from the particular department that reports back to the agency head. The agency head attends DAC meetings to receive a briefing. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about EEO complaints. And I see I have a question there. Can I wait till the end maybe to do the questions? Is that all right?
That's totally fine. It's
okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. So EEO complaints. Each state agency is required to create a compliant complaint process to make sure complaints are addressed in a timely manner. The appointing power must issue a written decision to the complainant within 90 days of the complaint being filed. If it cannot do so, it must notify the complainant in writing of the delay. Of the 301 agencies reviews conducted since 2015, 21 agencies, 6.9%, were found to be out of compliance in this area. And again, those agencies were required to submit a corrective action plan to get themselves back in compliance. All right, now I'm going to talk a little bit. Susie talked to you before about the state health questionnaire, the 610. That was a very antiquated form created by SPB decades ago. And it was created before ADA was enacted, and it was enacted prior to amendments in FEHA that made it unlawful to ask employees non-job related health questions regarding their disabilities. For instance, when Susie was first hired as a staff counsel with DFEH, she was required to fill out the form, and it asked her such things as bladder trouble, varicose veins, back pain, things that are not relative at all to an attorney. So she worked hard to work with SPB to get rid of that form. And since then, actually, CalHR has issued guidance to departments. They issued a memo in June 2022, which outlined a temporary process for hiring agencies to conduct pre-employment medical examinations, which includes utilizing healthcare providers' pre-employment medical form. They also recommended that the 610 be discontinued, and for people for safety sensitive positions where the employers felt they needed to continue the use of the 610, that they needed to check with their own legal department to make sure it was in compliance with FEHA. And CalHR is still making changes to its medical program and will publish additional guidance once that's completed. Another area of concern was during the pandemic. Well, actually, typing tests. Typing tests, when it was SPB, we administered typing tests. When it went to CalHR, the typing tests were largely given at one-stop centers to obtain typing certifications. And there was some concern, were these people, and it's mainly OTs and OAs that have to type, office technicians and office assistants that have to type 40 words a minute, were they receiving a reasonable accommodation if they needed it? So CalHR actually put out guidance to departments and let them know that if the OA or OT candidate that comes to the interview, if they don't have a typing certificate, they need to give them a typing test and provide reasonable accommodation at the time of the interview, so that all people have, again, a fair shot at reasonable accommodation. And really, that's all I have. And I just want to apologize. You had the Lexus of SPB speakers with Susie Ambrose, and you kind of got the Toyota version with me. But thank you for bearing with me. I appreciate it. And I think I can see one question here. Agencies. Yes, agencies can partner with other agencies to get their DACs together, and that's encouraged, because sometimes in smaller agencies it's awfully hard. And again, as long as they are making sure that each agency head gets the information from the people on the DAC of interest with persons of disabilities, that's just fine.
One question that came up in the chat, and that is, did you mean standard 910 form, not 610?
No, I meant 610.
You meant 610. Okay.
Yes. Did I say 910? If I did, I'm sorry.
Well, the standard.
There's two different forms. There's the 910 and the 610. And I believe it was the 610 that was a problematic form.
The 610 was the problematic form, not the 910. Okay.
Correct.
That was the question that came up, required some clarity. The question that comes to my mind automatically is, to what extent do you get involved with reasonable accommodation complaints processing, if any at all? Like if somebody's having issues and they tried their normal channel within their department, could they file a complaint with your department?
Yes, I believe they can file it with appeals. Okay.
And what steps do they need to follow to accomplish that?
I can go ahead and I can, it's probably in the appeals manual. I can take an excerpt from that and send it to you, Bobby, that you can distribute.
Great. That would be very helpful to our members. The other question that's on the chat is, I just learned that SPB received reasonable accommodation complaints, and that's what I just talked about. is there anywhere that statistics to those complaints are published? In other words, they're looking for some sort of statistic.
You know, I don't know, but I will inquire with the appeals division and I get back to you with that as well.
Sure, no problem. You also mentioned DAC and you monitor DAC, you review or audit questions relating to DAC.
Mhm.
One of the common issues you already described, some departments are too small to have their own DAC and they struggle to collaborate with other DACs or join other DACs. Once they have a DAC, are there any standards that says, well, this is an effective DAC, meaning the DAC is advising the agency heads, they are operating pretty much at the direction of the agency head and so on. In other words, are there anything that SPB look at when they're looking at the performance or the effectiveness of departmental DACs?
Yes, our compliance review has a checklist, which I can also share.
Okay. Is that form that's available on your website?
Probably, yes. Yeah, yeah.
Audit.
You want me to send that to you too, Bobby?
Yeah, that would be terrific.
Okay.
Any information that you provide. You were historically quite helpful in presenting the data that you were once involved with, creation of CalHR and so on, way back when. How did that come about? If you could give our audience a little bit of flavor or a little bit of background.
I'm not sure. Can you reframe the question?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I get it.
So essentially, you mentioned that the implementation team for Governor's Reorganization Plan #1 that created CalHR. So my question is, to what extent were you involved in the implementation of that Governor's Reorganization Plan that created CalHR, and what was the backdrop of that? So our audience can have a little bit of history.
Basically, I was the representative for SPB. There was a plan, the governor's reorganization, and a group of executives worked on that. And we had to, it was me, Dave Rex, who some of you may know, and Julie Lee. And we were the 3 team members that were in charge of working on the reorganization. So there was the part about moving certain SPV functions over to CalHR, like exams, the Office of Civil Rights, test development, all the admin functions moved over to CalHR. So we had to basically move the people, which included finding facility space, finding out where they're going to go. We had to work with controller's office for moving the positions. We had to work with finance because, of course, the budgets had to be adjusted and the position allocations had to be adjusted. We did outreach with we had change management to, kind of let people know what was happening. These things are moving from here to there. How's that going to affect the people? There was that component to it. What do you think? Again, yeah, the budget, the moving of positions, of course, new strategic plans because things had changed. The board, we had lost a lot of things. We lost exams, test development, civil rights. But we gained the policy division and we gained the compliance review division because the board wanted to be sure that when these things weren't under its direct control, that it could be ensure that hiring was still merit-based, EEO was being protected, and that we were working to actually streamline things by trying to propose legislative changes, reg changes to streamline and ease hiring. So those were the new components the board gained.
Great, terrific. Well, thank you for that answer. One of the other questions came on the chat is, if DAC is not being listened by the executive management, and I'm sure the author meant that advising the executive management or the executive, the head of the agency, never meets with them, never communicates, what should they do? How could they become more effective?
Well, they could. We in our compliance review unit, we have a special investigations where we handle complaints that wouldn't necessarily go to appeals. So they could call compliance review and talk to them about it. Or of course, they could elevate it to perhaps their agency head. But in the compliance review too, if they want to remain anonymous, that's probably the best way to go.
Okay.
It's better if they're non-anonymous because it helps that we can follow up and ask questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
So they should contact the compliance department with SPB and say, look, we are having this issue. Will you investigate? And we don't have any problem sharing our name and contact info so they can follow up on that. Great. I take it that, and I should also let the rest of the audience know, if you have any questions, please unmute and ask the question. Now is the time to ask Ms. Gillihan anything you need to know about State Personnel Board. And by the way, you mentioned you created this analogy that we got the Toyota version. I think we got the Maserati version with you. With the
I'm a fast talker. I'm sorry.
No, you have given us a lot of information that's very valuable to our members, and we certainly appreciate that. So do we have any questions that the audience wish to present to Ms. Gillihan? Dan,
yeah, hello.
Please unmute and ask the question.
Dan Clark here with ACCED. You rattle off a lot of numbers and so forth. Can I get a written report on that you just put together? I'd like to.
Yeah, we have a year-end report that we do on our website, and I can send that link to Bobby too. And you should be able to find those numbers and more information in that report.
That'd be great.
Thanks. Okay.
Any other question that we have for State Personnel Board? This is a rare opportunity that we get to sit, in front of a very knowledgeable representative from State Personnel Board, and they do a lot. One of the questions that I have in mind, there is a certain division between CalHR and State Personnel Board, and that's clear based on your functions and duties and their functions and duties. What do you do when there is a new law that comes to light, such as AB 1195 or AB 313 that went into effect? To what extent do you play any role in enforcement of that? Many of that has to do with the EO functions, leave hiring, and so forth. Or do you have any directive or guidance that you publish from your perspective as the compliance, entity?
Well, an example I gave earlier on is that new LEAP legislation. Our regs really pretty much said that already, but it's good. It's in law and it's in our statute and it's enforced now. And we are going to make sure that we're going to release a memo, and CalHR will create the memo, and we'll have CalHR put it out on listserv. We will work with CalHR to get that same information put into the HR manual, so everybody has one directive to follow.
Right. That makes sense. Any idea when that memo is going to be established or released?
I would say in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, great. So that's
sometimes it takes us a while to get the manual sections through all the approval process. But this is so important to Susie. This is one of the things that we're trying to kind of fast track some information sharing by just putting it out in a memo right away, so it doesn't take the time it takes to get the policy vetted. Right.
Exactly. No, that's really very good news, and I'm glad that you'll be sharing with that information to SDAC. Appreciate it. Oftentimes we run into issues with leap hiring. An example I would give you would be somebody who is both on their non-leap eligibility list and a leap eligibility list. They get hired some point down the road. They're wondering, should I go on the leap track or should I go the non-leap track? The leap track has various requirements and evaluation that happens monthly, whereas a regular probationary track only has, few occasional probationary report. So if that particular option is not being followed, what should that applicant do? Is that within your purview of enforcement as well?
We let the applicant decide what lists they want to be on, whether it be LEAP or non-LEAP lists. I'm hoping that applicant's disability would still get captured because they would disclose it upon getting hired.
Right, correct. And they would do that whether it's LEAP or non-LEAP anyway, if they needed any accommodation, particularly, that will come to light. But if the HR shop is not following that, directive or that preference of that applicant, then what would be the recourse of that applicant? Would they file a complaint with your compliance department?
They could. Because I don't know why HR would force them to use one list or another, but I suppose it's possible. And yeah, they could just file a complaint.
Okay, great. Well, I don't have any other questions for you. Are there any questions from the audience?
This is Susan Turnquist, and I have a question.
Please.
I'm just understanding that SPB, I'm really just learning about your involvement in the processes. And I was wondering, you talk about being involved in policy and legislation as an activist at the staff level. I work through the DAC, and I work in SDAC as the secretary. Can you just give like a brief, what level of involvement do you have in the policy and legislation regarded to persons with a disability at SPB? Is that an area that you guys advocate for? Is the first question.
If we were working on a legislative proposal, I don't think we have one this go around. We're working on clarifying probationary periods this go around, and making limited terms up to 2 years where you don't have to go through the rigmarole of 1 year and then getting another extension. And then we're looking at illegal appointments this go around. We're potentially saying that if it's not on the employees, it's not their fault. We're looking to let it go, and instead of just not after 5 years, but 1 year, we're going to get rid of that good faith illegal appointment is what we're pursuing. Of course, we don't know that that'll go through because we have to work with CalHR, the legislative staff, and we have to find out, are the unions going to like this, not like this? The departments, the other advocacy groups, because if there's too much dislike, it's not going to go through anyway. And then if we actually have the backing, then we have to go and talk to different legislators, staffers, and see if we can get them on board too. So again, it's a long process. I don't know, like on these three ones I just brought up, if they'll make it or not.
Well, that was leading into, is there anything that we as a community can do to help SPB be informed on issues that we're concerned about?
Yes. You could let us know if there's certain legislative or regulatory changes, because that's what we do in policy, is we try to work on those things and the HR manual. So if you have ideas,
you brought up the thing that's been bubbling in my head for a really long time. So the way the law is written and the way that it's reflected in the CalHR, when it comes to how the DACs communicate with the agency heads, the way I've seen it at being a part of a DAC interpreted is that the EEO officer acts as a liaison between the DAC and the agency head. That's the way I've seen it repeatedly. And when I read what did the CalHR handbook, it says the same thing. It says the EEO officer acts as a lead for a DAC committee. And for me, that it's a little confusing, because when I read the law, the way I see the law is that this is supposed to be a path for us to directly have a voice, separately from the EEO office. And I know this gets into muddy politics and also legalese, which means maybe I don't understand what I'm reading. But it's often been like, I know that I hear from other DAC committees the concern of like, I read the law and I think that means that I get a chance as a person with a disability to talk to the agency head and really let them know directly my concerns. And instead, what actually happens is the EEO officer kind of filters that information up to the director. And that filtering And if I'm going to be honest, the filtering includes that. I mean, you got to consider the EO officer is having to manage these issues themselves. There's a little bit of like the message isn't getting directly to, like I said, it gets filtered through the EO officer. And it seems, to me, it seems like it seems contradictory that the way the law is written and the way the CalHR manual is written for the EO office.
Is it in the HR manual section you're referring to?
It's a CalHR section that says about that, and I can try to pass that on through Bobby.
If you could pass it on to me and I can take a look at it, because you're right. The intent is, I think the EO officer facilitates putting together a DAC, maybe coordinates meetings, but the employees are supposed to have direct access to the agency head.
And so you can see how it's confusing for me, because it's like,
yes,
if they're acting as a lead, then of course everything would be filtered through them and through their perspective, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that interpreted from the position of persons with a disability trying to get their issues of concern up to the lead, that can feel kind of like I joined this committee for the purpose of having a voice, but my voice is being filtered.
If you could send me the document.
I will do that. I will definitely do that.
I can look at the HR manual, but if there's something else that CalHR put out, if you would send that to me, that'd be helpful.
It's actually the CalHR link that actually lists out the EO manual. I will definitely send it through Bobby and we'll get that to you. Thank you.
Okay,
I was just wondering,
great.
I've been trying to figure out who is the right person to talk about. It sounds like you might have at least some context for, is that following the law? Is that the way it's intended? Thank you so much.
That's what we're trying to do is with these old policies, like you remember the personnel management and the selection manual and all those old pinkies and all those old manual sections. What we're trying to do is update them, streamline them, make sure they're correct and they're clear for people to follow.
And by the way, I really appreciate you bringing and presenting the statistics from your reports. I think that's really helpful. I did put in the comments that I would love to see your agency come back like next year and do the same sort of thing on your annual reports, because I think this is really essential information for our community to hear.
Great.
Hey, Bob, I have a question.
Go ahead, Eduardo.
Oh, hi. So this is Eduardo with Department of Healthcare Services. So I wish there was a way for State Personnel Board or CalHR to mandate that every state agency has disability representation in their civil rights office. Sometimes, like if you submit an RA to the office, there's no set standard or set deadline, I guess is a better word, as to when they're supposed to get back to you on an RA request. So maybe things would run smoother if you submitted that request to the quote disabled representative that works in the civil rights office. Does that make sense? I wish there was a way to have that mandated where every civil rights office in the state has some type of disability representation in their office. Maybe that would make things run smoother. That's all I had to say. Wanted to get your take on
concept back to the board.
I'm sorry.
I will talk to Susie about your request about that being a policy call.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo, for that question. We also have a representative from CalHR that is kind enough to join us, and a liaison for CalHR, and Eli Medrano, and he could possibly answer to your specific question. He can do that now, or he is actually going to be presenting a little bit later in the role, and he can expand on that. But separately, Ms. Gillihan can also address that through what she just described. Thank you so much. I don't have any other questions. If nobody has any additional inquiry to present to Ms. Gillihan, we thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, and I hope you come back and see us soon and give us any information that you think is going to be valuable to our members in promoting hiring with person with disabilities in state service. That's what we are here to do. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bobby. And I'll get you those things. And if by chance I forget something, just let me know and I will get it to you.
I'll certainly
Okay,
do
I
that.
was taking notes, but yeah, just in case.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Very nice presentation.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye.